This card game was never really about pulling cards. It was never about sitting around the table and playing a game just to say you did. It was about giving families a better way to talk, a better way to listen, a better way to understand each other, a better way to work through tension, and a better way to take the next step and protect generations of hard work before a crisis forces the conversation. Because that is usually what happens. Families wait. They wait until someone gets sick, until someone dies. They wait until land has to be sold. They wait until a successor leaves. They wait until an in law feels pushed out. They wait until the resentment is so thick, nobody knows how to start. But what if families had a tool that made that first step less scary? What if they had a way to talk about retirement, roles, in laws, stories, boundaries, fairness, and the next steps without starting a fight? Today on the Pathfinder Legacy podcast, we are wrapping up the series on the Pathfinder Legacy conversation card game. We're stepping back and looking at how all 5 decks work together from the first conversation to the next action step. Because succession is not just one conversation, it's a journey. And sometimes the most important thing a family can do is just take the next mile. Welcome back to the Pathfinder Legacy podcast, and welcome to episode 56. Today, we are wrapping up this podcast series on the Pathfinder Legacy conversation card game. Over the last several episodes, we've walked through each deck. Deck 1, the Trailhead, which is starting that first conversation. Deck 2, the Handoff and Horizon, which covers retirement, roles, authority, transfer planning, and the real-world handoff. Deck 3, the In-Law Bridge, which covers spouses and belonging, boundaries, privacy, traditions, and protecting the household behind the successor. Deck 4 is the Legacy Lantern, the story, the meaning, reputation, values, hard years, proud moments, and that next chapter. Deck 5 is the Waypoints, which is turning good conversations into that clear next step. And today I want to put it all together because each deck has its own purpose, but the real power is how they work together. This tool was not created to replace professional advice. It is not a substitute for your attorney, CPA, lender, financial advisor, counselor, or other professionals. This podcast is educational and practical, not legal, tax, financial, or counseling advice. But this tool can really help families do something that often has to happen before the professional planning can even work. It can help them talk. It can help them name the real issues. It can help them slow down and listen. It can help them capture agreements. And it can help them move from avoidance to action. So if you want to purchase the Pathfinder Legacy conversation card game, or you want help using it with your family or clients, reach out to me at pathfinderlegacy.com. You can call, email, or text me. All right, let's look at how this whole game works together. So part 1, why this tool really matters. So there are a lot of books about estate planning, farm succession, transition planning, family business, trusts, wills, buy-sell agreements, and all the communication that goes with that. And many of them are very good. But here is the truth I kept coming back to. A lot of families do not need another book sitting on a shelf. They need something that helps them start. It gives them that push. Because most families are not stuck because they lack information. They are stuck because the conversation feels too complicated. They are stuck because no one wants to offend mom and dad. Stuck because the successor does not want to sound greedy. And they're stuck because the spouse does not know what they are allowed to say. They are stuck because siblings do not understand the business, and stuck because retirement has become someday. They're stuck because everything important has been assumed but not actually discussed. That is why I created the card game. Not because a card solves everything, but because the right question asked at the right time, in the right tone, can open up a door that has been locked shut for years. And once that door opens, the family can finally begin taking that next step. The Pathfinder Legacy Conversation card game is built like a journey. Each deck has a role, And families do not have to use them perfectly. They do not have to use every card. You don't have to sit down for 4 hours. Matter of fact, I recommend you do not sit down for 4 hours and try to solve anything. 2 hours max, and even that's pushing it for a long time. The goal is progress, not perfection. Now, let's walk through the 5 decks and how they all fit together. So, deck 1 is the Trailhead, which is starting that first conversation. Trailhead is where you start when the family knows we need to talk, but nobody knows how to begin. This is a deck for those awkward opening, the silence, the awkwardness, giving the first nudge, the first kitchen table meeting, the first question. A lot of families skip this step and they try to jump straight into who gets what? When are you retiring? How much is this all worth? What about my siblings? What about the land? What about the equipment? And yeah, those questions matter. But if you start there too quickly, people are going to get defensive. So the trailhead slows the conversation down and asks, what made now the right time to talk? What does success look like to you? What worries are you all carrying on your shoulders? And who needs a seat at the table? How often should we meet? What is one small agreement we can make today? For example, instead of the successor saying, Dad, when are you finally going to retire? The trailhead gives a softer starting point. What does a good transition look like for you? What would you want to be true in 1 year? What would you want to be true in 5 years? So that's a very different tone. One starts with pressure and the other starts the question with curiosity. And curiosity can lower the heat in the room. Use the trailhead when, as a family, you have never had a formal conversation. People are nervous, the topic feels too big, and there's a fear of conflict. Or the family keeps saying, we really need to talk about this, but no one ever takes the first step. The trailhead helps families begin without lighting the match for the dumpster fire. Deck 2 is the handoff and horizon, making the transition real. Once the conversation has started, families usually need to move into the next practical position, which is the handoff. That is where the handoff and horizon comes in. This deck is for the questions that can make or break a transition. What does retirement actually mean? When will those roles change? Who's changing those hats? Who makes which decisions? Who has authority? How does equipment transfer? How do lease relationships transfer? What about compensation? What about money clarity? What about the child or family member who is not ready for any sort of responsibility? What about contingency planning? This is the deck that moves the family from vague hopes to real planning. So here's an example. A family says, in 5 years, we will switch houses and you will move to the farm. But 5 years becomes 5 more years, and then 5 more years. The successor is left trying to build a business, a household, and a future around someday. That is not a plan. That's a waiting room. Handoff and Horizon helps the family replace someday with a date, a season, a milestone, the role change of hats, a written agreement, a professional meeting. So here's an example script that a successor might say. I'm not trying to push you out. I'm trying to plan my life for me and my family. Can we figure out and define what retirement means this year, what changes next year, and what milestones tell us the handoff is actually happening? Those are hard questions to ask and for some to even answer. But it's also a fair question because you cannot run a business on a moving target. So you would use this deck when retirement is vague, the successor is waiting for clarification, decision-making authority is unclear, equipment and lease transitions need attention, money or compensation is creating quiet resentment, or the family needs to match responsibility with authority. This deck makes the handoff visible. We can see the target. Deck 3 is the in-law bridge, protecting the household behind the successor. The in law bridge may be one of the most personal decks in the whole game because succession does not just affect mom, dad, and the successor, it affects the spouse, it affects the marriage, it affects the children and the home and privacy and family time. It affects the holidays. It affects whether the next generation can actually build a life, not just work the farm. And I have said before, I wish I would have had this tool years ago when I came into the farm family. Because when you marry into a farm family, you do not just marry a person, you marry into that way of life. It's a work schedule and the family history. It's a house that may still feel like grandma and grandpa's house to everyone else, a yard where people may stop by without calling, a set of traditions and expectations you may not understand yet, and a whole list of unwritten rules nobody hands you on day one. You don't get a policy manual on the day one when you move into a farm family and say, here you go, here's a set of rules. No, the in-law bridge helps families talk about those things before resentment builds. So, for example, a young family moves into the farmhouse. The older generation still sees that house as the family house. They knock once and walk in. They stop by whenever. They may not mean any harm, but that next generation feels like they have no privacy. That is not just a housing issue, that is a boundary issue. That is a marriage issue. That is a succession issue. Because if the successor spouse feels like they never have a home, that strain eventually shows up in the business. So here's an example of a script that the successor might say with this deck. We like having family close by, and we respect the history of this house. But this is our home now, and we need privacy. Can we agree to call or text before just stopping in? So that's not disrespect. That is clarifying what the boundaries are so you can have privacy. Oh, I would use this deck when a successor is married or getting married. The spouse feels outside of the family. Privacy or boundaries are tense. The successor is stuck in the middle. Invisible work is going unrecognized, or family traditions need to make room for a new household. This deck helps families build belonging without smothering the next generation. All right, moving on to deck 4, which is a legacy lantern. This is the story, the meaning, and the next chapter. Legacy Lantern is that story deck. It helps families remember that the farm is not just an asset, it is a story. It is the land, the hard years. It is the moments that we can be proud of what we accomplished. It is the people who are behind and who built it. It's the unsung heroes, the values, and the turning points and reputation and artifacts and promises. This deck is especially helpful when a family has become too focused on the fight. Sometimes people are arguing about land, money, equipment, or control, but underneath that argument is grief, or maybe it's fear, or pride, or a story that has never been told. Legacy Lantern helps families slow down and ask, what does this place mean? What did it cost to build? Who helped carry it all those years? What do we want the next generation to protect? What do we want them to improve? So here's an example. And I think about the old farm ledger. To one person, it may look like a dusty old book. To grandma, it may be the record of how she kept the family afloat. The year the calves paid the bank note, the year there was barely enough extra money to go around, the bills she tracked by hand, the stress that happened behind closed doors. That ledger is not just paper, it's how they persevered. And when the next generation hears that story, the asset starts to carry meaning. An example script that would be used with this deck is a next generation family member might say, before we talk about what happens to this land or equipment, can we talk about the story behind it? What does this mean to you beyond the money? That kind of question can soften a hard conversation. So use the Legacy Lantern deck when the family needs to reconnect, a meeting has been tense, the next generation does not know the history, stories that may be lost, or the family needs to separate values from old habits. Legacy Lantern reminds families that legacy is not a museum, it is a lantern. It gives light for the next chapter. The last deck, deck 5, which is turning talk into action. The final deck is the Waypoints. And this is that action deck because a good conversation matters, but a good conversation without the next step can still leave a family stuck. The Waypoint deck helps families end each session with a small, clear action. Schedule the next mile, write a one-page summary, create a roll map, schedule a professional pit stop, draft a landlord touch point, create a contingency snapshot. These actions may sound small, but small actions are how succession progress is built. Here's an example. A family has a good conversation about equipment. Instead of leaving with a vague agreement, they pull a waypoint card. Maybe they pull the one-page summary and they write 3 agreements, 3 open questions, and 1 next step. Now the conversation does not disappear. It has a place to be recorded. So an example script would be, before we leave, let's write down what we agreed on, what is still open, and who owns or is responsible for the next step. That one sentence can prevent a lot of future confusion. Use the Waypoint deck at the end of every session, every single one, because the family should always leave knowing, what did we agree on, what is still open, who owns or is responsible for the next step, when are we meeting again. Waypoints turn good intentions into visible progress. Now let's talk about how to actually use the game, because I don't want this to feel so complicated, but the best way is just to start simple. A 45-minute kitchen table session, I'll call it. And here's a basic structure. So step 1, you pick one deck. Do not use all 5 decks at once. Just pick one deck that fits where your family is right now. So if you have never started, you're going to start with the Trailhead. If retirement and management transfer are the issue, pick the Handoff and Horizon. If spouses, privacy, or belonging are tense, pick the in-law bridge. If the family needs meaning, healing, or connection, pick the Legacy Lantern. If you already had a conversation and need action, pick the Waypoint deck. And then step 2, you're going to draw 2 or 3 cards from whichever deck you pick. And you do not need to answer 10 cards in one sitting, just 2 or 3 cards. That might even be 2 or 3 cards too much. So one good question can create enough conversation for an entire meeting. Step 3, everyone gets a chance to talk. Let everyone answer. Give each person time, no interrupting, no correcting their memory, no jumping straight to defense. The goal is to understand before you solve. Step 4 is you need to write down the agreements. You need to record what was said, open questions, and those next steps. Step 5, end with a waypoint. So do not leave without at least one action. That's the rhythm. You choose a deck, you pull a few cards, you listen, you write it down, and then you choose a waypoint. That is enough to begin. Some families may hear all of this and think, yeah, whatever, that sounds good, but I still do not know where we would even begin. So here is a simple way to decide. You ask 3 questions. What are we avoiding? If the answer is retirement, money, management, compensation, decision authority, leases, equipment, or risk, you need to start with the Handoff and Horizon. Another question you can ask is, where is the friction? If the friction is around privacy, the house, in-laws, spouses, family time, drop-ins, feeling left out, or being stuck in the middle, then you're going to start with the in-law bridge. If the family is tense and grieving, defensive, or disconnected, start with the Legacy Lantern. Ask about the origin story. Ask about the proud moments. Ask about the history of the land or who the unsung heroes are. Sometimes the family has to remember what they are protecting before they can talk about how to protect it. And if the family truly has no idea where to start with the Trailhead. Ask, what made now the right time to start this conversation. That's a good beginning. Now, let me give you some examples of how families could use the game in real life. So, the first example is the family that keeps saying someday. This family has talked casually about succession for years. And dad says, we'll get to it. And mom says, we don't want to rush into anything. And the successor is working full time, but does not know what the future holds. Start with the trailhead to set the tone, and then move into the handoff and horizon to define retirement and decision authority. End with a waypoint, schedule the next mile, or create a one-page summary. The goal is to replace someday with a session, date, or milestone. So here's another example. The successor is farming hard. The spouse is working off the farm, raising the family, carrying lots of stress, maybe providing health insurance, maybe doing unpaid work nobody sees. They feel like the farm gets everything and the household gets whatever is left. Start with the in-law bridge. Use cards around welcome, information access, family time, boundaries, and invisible work. End with a waypoint, boundary builder, or a one-page summary. The goal is not to blame the farm. The goal is to protect the marriage and household so the farm has a future. So another example is if the siblings are worried about fairness. The farming heir is worried the farm will not survive a full buyout. The non-farming heirs are worried they will be left out or surprised. Mom and dad do not want conflict, so they avoid the conversation altogether. Start with the trailhead if the conversation has never happened. Then use the handoff and horizon for fairness, viability, decision authority, and professional planning. Use Legacy Lantern to talk about what the land means and what mom and dad hope the next generation understands. And with the professional pit stop from Waypoints, because that conversation likely needs a farm succession planner, attorney, CPA, or financial planning input. Another example is the family has old wounds. Maybe there's been a lot of yelling over the years. Maybe someone was left out. Maybe someone came back. Maybe a prior decision hurt people. Maybe the family is not ready for numbers yet because the emotional temperature is way too high in the room. Start with the Legacy Lantern, not to avoid that hard topic, but to rebuild some of the empathy. And you need to ask, what was the hardest year? And what did it teach us? Who contributed but did not get enough credit? What do we want the next generation to protect, and what should they improve? Then use a waypoint to schedule the next conversation. The goal is to create enough trust to continue. And another example is everyone talks, but nothing happens. I mean, we know these happen all the time. You have a family meeting and you're talking, but there's never any progress happening. That you continue to circle the same topics, but again, nothing gets done. So start with waypoints. Use schedule the next mile, the one-page summary, the role map, professional pit stop, or contingency snapshot. The goal is to stop circling and start moving forward. So now, before you pull out the cards, I want to offer a few ground rules. So rule number 1, do not use these cards as weapons. Do not pull a card and say, see, this is what you need to answer. That defeats the purpose. The cards are not there to trap people. They are there to open conversations. Rule number 2, you can skip a card. Some topics may be too hot to handle, too hot for the first session, and that's okay. Skip it and come back to it later. But avoiding it forever will be a hot problem. Pacing is smart planning. So, rule number 3, one card might be enough. If one card opens an important conversation, stay right there. You do not need to have to force your way through the deck. Rule number 4, write things down. Memory is not a succession plan. Write down agreements and questions and action steps and dates so everybody knows what the discussion is and what the final plan was. So there's no assumptions or that's not how I remember it. Rule number 5, you got to know when to bring in help. If the conversation turns legal, tax, financial, or deeply emotional, bring in the right professionals. So that's not failure. That's helping to protect what you've built. Rule number 6, you got to know when to end it. I said earlier, don't leave it out there for 2+ hours. 45 minutes is a productive conversation, and that's better than a 3-hour emotional marathon. Quit while people can still come back to the table. So when I created this card game, I was thinking about the families who are stuck, the ones who know they need to talk, but they do not know how. The ones who have lived through years of tension, the ones who have already had a wake up call, the ones trying to prevent the next one, the ones where the successor is wondering if staying is worth it, the ones where mom and dad are scared of letting go, the ones where the spouse is trying to belong, and the one where the siblings do not understand the farming business at all, the ones where land means more than money. The ones where everybody loves the farm, but nobody knows how to talk about the future without starting a fire. This tool exists because families need more than information. They need a starting point. They need language. They need structure. They need a way to slow down, take a step back, and talk like people who are on the same side of the table. And maybe, most of all, they need to know they are not the only family that wrestle with this. Because these conversations are hard, but avoiding them is going to make your life much harder. So, to close this series, I want to give you one simple challenge. I call this the From Avoidance to Action Challenge. Set aside 30 minutes, not 3 hours, 30 minutes. So, first step, write the sentence down. The conversation we have been avoiding is blank. Maybe it's retirement, compensation, what hat dad's going to wear. Maybe it's the house or the in law factor or the non farming heirs. Maybe it's the estate plan or the family story. You got to name it. Fill in the blank. So the next step, ask, do we need to start slowly? If so, choose the trailhead. Do we need to define the handoff? Choose the handoff and horizon. Do we need to talk about spouses and boundaries or belonging? And you're going to choose the in-law bridge. Do we need to reconnect with the story and meaning? You're going to choose the legacy lantern. Do we need action? Yeah, well, then you're going to choose a waypoint. And then the next step, just pull one card, take 10 minutes, just one card, read it, let each person answer. No interrupting, no fixing, no defending, just listen. Step 4, take 10 minutes and choose one next step. Select somebody to write down one thing we heard today, one thing we still need to understand, one action we need to take before the next conversation. Then schedule that next conversation. That is how you begin. It's not perfect, but it's being honest with yourselves, and that is enough for the next mile. This episode wraps up the series on the Pathfinder Legacy Conversation card game. And I hope as you have listened through each deck, you have heard that this tool is not about making hard conversations disappear. It is about making them possible. The Trailhead helps families start. The Handoff Horizon helps families define the transfer. The in-law bridge helps families protect the household and their relationships. Legacy Lantern helps families understand the story and the meaning. And Waypoints help families take action. Together, these decks create a path, not a perfect path, and it's not going to be painless, but it will be a path forward. And sometimes that is what families need the most. They need a way forward. So as we wrap up episode 56, here is what I want you to remember. You do not need to fix the whole family in one meeting. You do not have to solve the whole farm transition in one conversation. You do not have to have all of the answers before you even begin. You just have to have a better starting point, a better question, a better way to listen, a better way to write down what was said, a better way to take the next step. That is what this card game was created to do. It helps families move from avoidance to action, assumptions to clarity, tension to understanding, good intentions to next steps. At the end of the day, the legacy is not just the land, the farmhouse, the machinery, the cattle, the crops, the leases, the estate plan, the balance sheet, or even the stories. It is the willingness to sit down before a crisis hits. It is the courage to ask the better question. It is the humility to listen. It is the respect to make room for the next generation. It is the wisdom to bring in help when you need it. It is the love to protect the relationships, not just the assets. And it is the commitment to keep taking the next mile together. Thanks for joining me on the Pathfinder Legacy podcast. If this episode made you think about your own farm's future, consider sharing it with a family member or a friend who could use the help. Sometimes the hardest conversations are absolutely the ones that matter the most. Until next time, I'll see you between the ditches.
Thanks for listening to the Pathfinder Legacy Podcast, where your future is our focus. Be sure to subscribe, follow us on social media, and visit us at pathfinderlegacy.com to start building your transition plan today.